Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Audsley. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It is my deep, deep, deep pleasure to introduce Hanae Jonas, who is originally a poet from Vermont. Her work has appeared in the Kenyon Review, ZYZZYVA, the Iowa Review, Jubilat, and many other publications. She holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Michigan and is the recipient of fellowships and residencies from the Vermont Studio Center, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, Kundiman, Oxbow School of Art, Mineral School, and the Stadler Center for Poetry. I want to take a moment to thank the Rana Jaffe Foundation, who is funding our Writers on the Rise series, which supports rising writers who may or may not have published a book or who have not yet had their work out into a broad audience. I was trying to figure out a way to define rising versus emerging, and they're very similar, but I feel like we can always be emerging or always be, rising as a writer. The blank page is equal for everyone. In any case, I am so happy to have Hanae Jonas here reading for us because on a personal note, Hanae and I were also residents together at Vermont Studio Center in November 2018 for a month. And I got to hear her read her poems then, and I met her and we got to spend time together and we talked about poetry and we talked about the visiting writer who was there that month. And it's really, really fun to be able to bring her back and have her read for Vermont Studio Center. And I wish she was here in person, but the virtual stage does allow us to connect with people from all over the world and almost every state of the US. So it's been a pleasure to be hosting this series. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Hanae Jonas, our Writers on the Rise reader for tonight at Vermont Studio Center. Thank you for being here, Hanae.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for that introduction. Can you hear me okay? Good. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. I'm really happy to be reading for Vermont Studio Center. Yeah, I feel like it's really fitting that you, or to be introduced by you, since as you mentioned, we were at VSC together as residents. So yeah, it's great to be reunited at VSC in a manner of speaking. And yeah, so thank you so much to VSC for having me. Thanks as well to the Rana Jaffe Foundation. And thank you, Sarah, for all your work. And thanks everybody for coming and listening. So tonight I'll be reading about 10 poems. It'll be a mix of newer and older work. And so yeah, I'm gonna get started. So the first poem I'm going to read is called The View. The View. I lived across from a church at the back of the town. I watched the outcomes congregate. You are dead, you are married, you are temporarily improved. I annotated the strangers, imagined skipping earth, but people I knew around town lay wanting. I posed myself plain, quiet all summer long, my parcel of room gone unincorporated, away from the pushers of nostalgia basting in memories around every corner. Through the glass I stared down the church garden of statues, their dopey expressions blank enough to serve as canvases for other people's interests. Any aura of solace slapped on by prayer, vandalism disguised as love. Like spray-painted pupils, mustaches, horns, whatever makes a body human in the recognizable ways. Stationed in the doorway of my safety, I understood a statue sees in only one direction, and not very far at that. I memorized the cost of stone, went outside. I waited for anyone to thrust straight through me, the length of their benevolent hands. Pastoral. I watched my old life go by like television. Slopes of grass whipping against bright blue skies. Objects some called tools and others totems. A woodpile, a sheepskin, garlic curing from the rafters. A river's loose slaps upon slabs of warm rock. Secret spot, read the caption disseminated online. Koi copy, cool, said the Flatlanders, whose ranks I'd effectively joined. While those I left drifted closer to one another or God, to the sources of life itself, children and dirt. Unkept by the present tense, I was distant in my watching, an existence I too tendered stagily as free. Like television, I was buying whatever was for sale. As the appraisers said, you don't seem like you're from there. But I simmered in the grid of theirs off the grid life. The flowing virtue of verdant surfaces, the cemented down conclusion that meaning must be near. The siren song, soft focus of my own slushy memories reenacted by someone else. Good enough, I brushed their expiration from my view. I watched the endless plot of daily benedictions over the land. The land, oh, any of you could feel you were alive in its popular image. Lupins. In those days, I put lupins in a jar on the table. There were women who feared me for being a kid. Listen, he'd say, now you call the shots, but get the pokers out of your eyes. It was a really big time dreaming slick by the river. I learned to hold still so the small fish gathered round. Imagined getting rich would be something like that. Blue flowers in a jar with the label still on. A minor act of allowing nature to come near. How its authority revealed me, electric and small, my brain full of shame and blonde hair. I was darker than them, wrenching weeds from the yard. But how still I could hold, how he held me so still. Listen, he'd say, you can always pick again. But the jars I kept filling with the feral blue stalks, the planets coming round like a stray dog you fed once. How their teeth gleamed with a sureness like graves. How I came up out of it, a stone wall crumbling down. So this next poem I actually worked on at BSc, so just wanted to note that. Homing. I have my wrong condition, waiting for roadkill to wake back up. Alive for a crayon landscape that petitions me at night. Scribble of a hill, a little hit of God, to go anywhere more docile than facts. To wake is to wait for admonishments on instinct, watching a homing animal flatten into generic bones. Without flesh, I can't feel location. I cross out names for people, this town. Outside, the year wastes away, stupid sacrifice. The calendar is making me harsh. Day now I listen for birds tuned to the pitch of a haunt from which I can't be delivered. What beauty. Scared, even then, to state the obvious. Not very white, excessive vocabulary for a child, memory of embarrassing precision. Answer to number one, privately B. The obvious mistake was always having answers. In the icebreaker, naming any dumb thing that's good, the woolly recognition, the clairvoyance line, you know the trees preserve you. Saying trees and not pudding on the first day of school, the metallic laughter of instruction entered me. Abort spectacle, keep the tongue from psychic spill. But if cleanly arranged, but half Gaijin, half New Age, now how should I choose between discrepancies? E.g., I carried love's knife for practical applications, or desire is a vision mildly coerced. If I make a clearing in my story, I burn the forest down, grow long every hair on my body, pray to offend what beauty floats by. If I pray to be seen, I become nothing. So this poem is a elegy. I always say that because in my experience, it's not obvious. Dead lexicon. You deep snow I miss. You knee-high slosh. You shuddered down with the silence of a subtitle, the mesmerism of moon. A little blood in the powder, you quick spilling stain. You lacquered my neighborhood, made all words white, showed me why we diagram angels, carve imprints to hide inside. Take something public, make it private again. How dearth showered down into a child's cup. I carried it around, full of you turned into water, tipped it back to shield into me the last trace. How grief froze you good in your neat white jeans as the lights came up in the sawed down trees. How many kinds of pine can I name? How many words for rhyme, for wreath? Everything that acts is actual. I shut the tired book, but open the longing song. Good to live down here for another spell. In the morning slums of love, the sun-crazed roads travel into me, and his sounds dirty as lakes. Where the map grid ends, so much water begins. Like a song, we listen even to the sleeping rock stream, the kind of noise you can't talk about in a book. When a road walks you this far, don't try to say it wasn't actual. I hear the proof when he wakes like warm gravel against my ear. Susurrus sub rosa, I don't know how to keep this down or away from the cartographers, so I won't get sized to faithful scale. I just want to note some attributions in that poem. I stole the title from Denise Levertov. And there's also a couplet in the middle that I know you can't see it, but it's italicized. So it's we listen even to the sleeping rock stream. So I wanted to also note that that's borrowed as well. So it's slightly reworked, but borrowed from Susan Howe's book, My Emily Dickinson. But there's another layer, which is that Susan Howe actually borrowed and reworked that line from Jonathan Edwards, who was an 18th century preacher, philosopher from New England, I think mostly Northampton, actually. So there's a lot of like intertextual layers there, but wanted to give credit where credit's due. Yeah, so I'm gonna read a few more. This one's kind of a newer one. The woods. To make of my life a serial adores, to gradually reduce my tolerance for freeze, to pass from zone 5A to 6A to 8B to 10A, yet still bare hands cold from technology. Every night before bed and in the scarcely orange dawn, a 6:30 apprehension, no matter the timestamp of sleep. To watch in the blue glow, circles around the body tighten year after year, to be unchecked on and unchecking. To go back down there, now external, a specter of history not quashed but quiescent, a speck in the charged dirt of a frozen field. To photograph the field, to receive 7 hearts as comment, yet silence, re-personal transmission. To picture every moment as a site of surveillance, blue glow, an auric egg around the sweet nights and the concealed. To observe the self flickering in the mind of the beloved, to decline a coherent eye. To watch the light faintly glimmer from a crack around the door, to open it and exit the fairy tale. The woods' gloomy sprawl, hallucinatory reach, network of the absent cantering inside. To have never seen lurking or coming toward me shadow long, old danger, empty new life. Okay, so I'm gonna end with a pair of poems that kind of go together. Imagining a forest by the sea. I can't get out of the house when the town is like this. Symmetrical shrubs carelessly rolling, propriety around. To love my near future is to trust bright vernacular, but trust sounds braver coming from any mouth but mine. Daily guided imagery, switching suicide for mundanity. Now the border of what is possible sleeps further from me yet. Flat out in the margins, a 3-card spread ending with oppression. Have I reached the periphery of my survival unromantic sweep? The lush undergrowth of his care proportional to the exit of urgent images, which once I spilled freely, excess trash around town. I am not special, not even very psychic, just shutting my eyes for long periods of time. I have like a little end note for that poem as well. So the word oppression is capitalized in the poem, and that's because it actually refers to a card from the Thoth Tarot that's called the Lord of Oppression. So it's the 10 of Wands for any tarot readers who are listening. Imagining a forest by the sea. Self-slaking exile into the land of weeping spruces. I still know in the right landscape how to stay, how to remain close to the earth, or any range they call alive. I'm not my ugly evidence, I am still armed by illusion of sororal touch, lank grasses under my hands. Safe from the guidebook, my extant capacity to defect to the flesh logic of deceit scandal inside of which, no contract with the drab, no drowsy silt, always up ahead, no use for dark doorways to leave through. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hanae. If there are any questions you'd like to ask Hanae, please feel free to participate however you'd like. You can drop it into the chat and I'll read it for her, or you can also unmute and also turn on your video if you'd like, and ask directly. I love your work so much. And I have some questions that came to mind as you were reading. But I don't know where to start. And I'm wondering if you yourself would like to just talk about the work that how you think of your work first. Or I can just, yeah, how do you, I know that like C.D. Wright and Denise Levertov are like big influences. And I'm wondering, yeah, you just wanted to talk about are you working on a full-length manuscript? And yeah, are those poems from a larger project?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. The poems most of the poems I read are from a full-length manuscript that I've been working on for a long time. It's at this point, I'm thinking of it as done, but I feel like it always keeps evolving. So yeah, most of the work I read was from that. And then I'm also working on another manuscript. So I read 2 poems from that, Pastoral and The Woods came from like the newer work. So yeah, I think there's some overlap between the 2 projects, but I do think of them as being distinct and having slightly different interests and aims. I think the first book in my mind, is more about kind of centered around belief and kind of like questions around like belief in external systems of various kinds, both sort of like the ones more traditional, like, spiritual systems, but then also things like relationships and literature and like all kinds of stuff. And then the second manuscript to me is more centered around place and distance and like relationships as sort of mediated by distance and technology. So yeah, I think they certainly have like overlapping interests. I mean, I think like time and memory and like nostalgia and things like that are kind of like evergreen for me. But yeah, I do think of them as being a little different.
Thank you. I have Sandra says lovely voice.
Oh, thank you.
And Claire Needham was says, it's so wonderful to hear you read these poems again. And Claire says, I'm wondering, how do poems begin for you? How do you start?
Hi, Claire. Thank you for that question. Yeah, I think that's actually a great question, because it's actually changed a lot for me, I think, as I've kind of moved through my writing life. I think for most of the time that I've been writing poetry, poems always started for me in like sound, mostly. Like I would come up with some phrase or image or something, and then kind of just like build a poem around it, but not really have any idea where it was going or what it was about. Or like similarly, I would overhear something or read something that that I liked, and then kind of just riff on that. But yeah, I think I always just kind of started with like little fragments, but I never really started with ideas. And I think more recently I've been more interested in starting from ideas rather than from language. So that's actually been like for me, like a really interesting challenge and new way of working. And that's not to say like I 100% do that, but yeah, I think like I've like with my first manuscript, I really didn't approach it with any kind of like preconceived ideas about what I wanted to work on or write about. But I think with the second one, I have a little bit more of an idea going into it of what I'm interested in. So yeah, so it's changed.
And did you feel that shift happening in between the two manuscripts? Or
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that if there's any like reason I can point to as to why, but I do think it like more or less aligns with when I started working on this second one.
yeah, Claire also says that she sees pastoral and the woods having different music.
Yeah, thank you. That tracks with me as well.
Sandra says, I feel your voice is coming from landscapes. How do you feel situated in your poems?
How do I feel situated in them? That's an interesting phrasing in and of itself, I think. I mean, I think that I definitely like write. I think landscape is definitely a touchstone for me, and I think especially like the work that I chose to read tonight, I was sort of noticing when I was like just going through it beforehand that I felt like landscape sort of figured heavily in many of these poems. So yeah, I think that that's certainly true. As far as how I feel situated in them, I mean, I do think that my poems tend to have like a strong eye, like a kind of traditional lyric eye. So I'm not sure like if Sandra, if you meant like that the voice is of the voice of landscape or something to that effect. But yeah, I think of landscape as being more something that the eye like interacts with or interfaces with. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, are you saying more that landscape is perceived through the first person speaker?
Yeah, exactly.
I was wondering what your relationship is towards the lyric I, towards the first person, and when I hear your work and when I've read your work on the page or on the screen, I'm wondering if your relationship with the lyric I is separated from autobiographical mode, in some ways. I'm not sure if I'm framing that like question appropriately, but yeah, I guess, how do you think about the lyric I or the first person speaker in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's a really perceptive reading, Sarah, because I guess I would say that I do feel, as I said, that like pretty much all of my poems have are written from the perspective of an I, and in that way, I think kind of, yeah, exist in that tradition of the lyric I. And I think they're kind of straightforward in that way. But I think especially in the first manuscript, I definitely am interested in kind of pushing back against the idea, or like the assumption that the lyric I is autobiographical, which isn't to say that it is or isn't, but I think that that sort of bringing that question to the forefront is something that I'm interested in. And I don't know if I really read any poems tonight that do that explicitly, but that is actually like a subject that I'm interested in several other poems. So I think pushing back against like an assumption of autobiography is something that that I try to do. So yeah, I think that's perceptive of you, Sarah.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating because, and really, I admire it so much because it's so different from my work, where I really lean in towards the first person in the autobiographical mode, so much so that I have become wary of it in my work and tried to start using like third person and like, but and like can't use first person plural. Like I don't know how to write a poem with like saying we, like, you know, it's like, you know, really difficult for me, like that consideration. Like how do I speak for like a group or community in which that I feel like a part of. And the way that I see your work is the the first person, the I, especially in the first poems you were reading, felt more like the I was like a light touch, which is not like a craft technical term, but as how I was sensing it from your work. And Sandra has just a follow-up comment that she senses you seeing from a distance, and she says thanks for taking her question. And that Lupin also was a poem that she admired. Lauren says, beautiful, captivating reading. Thank you. I loved all the poems. Lupin caught me. And is that from your first manuscript? I guess because we've opened up this door of first project versus second project, I think people are interested in which poems land in which. But yeah, there was a question about where Lupin falls in your project.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that is in the first manuscript. Yeah, that's sort of an older poem, actually. I mean, not that old in the grand scheme of things, but about 5 years old, I'd say. And yeah, was there a question about it, or just where?
Just where, which. Yeah, I was wondering, when I met you as a resident, when we were residents together, and I do remember you saying that you really wanted to stand behind the language, and that was the primary, your primary concern when drafting and writing poems. And it's so fascinating to hear that you still care about the language, but now you're also interested in and ideas or concepts that a poem could work out or like consider or turn over a concept or an idea. And I'm not really sure where I'm going here. I find that that I'm interested in learning about that evolution of a relationship to a poem itself, and how writing a poem can evolve over our writing lives in our relationship to what a poem can do for us or as poets, or also how we engage with the process of writing a poem. can and evolve over time. And I'm wondering, for me, some of the poems in my manuscript are also like, I wrote them years ago, and now I kind of hate them. Or just like, I want to be like, no. But I also am very stubborn and can't like let go of this like first project. And I'm wondering when you felt like, okay, I'm going to work on a different project, or like how, because I feel like maybe I'm at that point where I should just like start working on it, something totally different. Because I feel like I could just obsess over this like one portion of 60 pages for like the next like 5 years until it gets published or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that was like a ramble, and there were like idea questions in there.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that those are all the things you mentioned, I think are very connected. I mean, I think actually like the very first thing you said about something that I had said like 3 years ago at Vermont Studio Center about like standing behind language. I mean, I think actually that is related to exactly what you were just talking about, which is that I think at that point, I was definitely in a place, I was in the place that you were just describing, where I felt like, I've been working on this like first book for forever, and I just want to be done with it. But now I like feel a disconnect from some of the older work, and so how to sort of like parse that, and the question of like, what do you do with work that you aren't that excited about anymore? And so I think for me, the test, I think, was like, even if I'm not that interested in the subject matter at this point, if I am excited about the language still, then that's sort of like the test for me as to whether it should stay or go. So I think, in that vein, when I was working on my first manuscript, and I mean, I use the past tense lightly because I've been working on it like this year as well. I cut a lot. And so I think for me, like really, like this is a very kind of like just cut and dry answer. But I think for me, it was done when it was long enough, because I kept having the problem where it wasn't long enough to send places. Because I just kept throwing stuff away. So I think
how did you develop that ruthlessness?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm just like, honestly, I just have like a critical personality, like inherently. So I think just like severe perfectionism maybe. Which again, it's like, has downsides for sure. But I do think something that has been interesting for me in like working on a first book for such a long time is that, and having work in it that is really old at this point. Like, I mean, there's not that many poems, but there are a couple that are probably close to 10 years old. And so something that's really interesting about that for me is like revisiting that work, like, because I feel like actually when you have so much distance, then it actually allows, like for me, it's allowed me to be kind of detached from it, and to like revise it with like to borrow your word, kind of like a ruthless eye, which is actually like kind of fun, to like take this poem that I wrote when I was 22 or 23 or whatever, and like think like, oh, how would like my like instincts and poetics like of today, like how can I apply those to this old work? And so actually I think that's been really interesting. I kind of have felt like if there's even just like a part of the poem that I still like think is good, or I still think is excited about, I feel like it's like a challenge. Like, can I rehabilitate this poem? So yeah, so actually I've revised a lot of older work like in the last year or 2 years. So yeah, that's been interesting. And then I guess you were also asking, like, how do you know when to move on or like when to start something new?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if like I have like a really good answer for that, but I think for me, it was just when I started writing new work, and the new work clearly felt different in like a number of ways, like in terms of the aesthetic, I guess, but also in terms of the subject matter and the voice. And it was just, yeah, I was like, I wrote some new poems, and it was really hard to imagine how they would fit into this manuscript that I had. So I just decided it was the second book, which isn't to say that like everything I wrote from that point forward is like a second book poem. I mean, I actually like for example, the first poem that I wrote that I kind of saw as belonging to a different project was The Woods, which I read earlier. And but I actually wrote like, I don't know, 3 or 4 other poems after that I ended up putting in the first manuscript.
Oh,
so
okay.
I've kind of been going back and forth in terms of new work and how I see it fitting into projects.
Well, yeah, it's so exciting. I'm always like fascinated to hear about different writers' processes, and you know, every individual writer is different, and in that every individual writer has different problems or different solutions. And different like tendencies, and as I think you use the word instincts, which I really I get the vibe that you have a good internal barometer for like what works and what doesn't, which I appreciate, knowing that it also like having a length of time, the time and distance separation from work also increases the ability to be ruthless or critical or to cut stuff.
Yeah,
because I've been very like nervous, or like I think I've been too precious and not like cutting stuff. And yeah, I think that's one of the things I need to like think about seriously and be like, really, does this poem actually like belong? like this, you could do better, Sarah. Like
yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I think like that instinct of being really kind of ruthless with yourself and like allowing time and distance from the work to kind of enable that like criticality, or like kind of like an almost external eye or something, like I not I but that I feel like that was something that kind of became important to me to develop like after grad school, because I think like, I mean, I don't know what your experience is, but like when I was in workshop all the time, I think I got really used to relying on other people's feedback or like even permission for something to be done or not done. And so I remember, after I finished school and like kind of like feeling lost, like when I would write something new and being like, oh, I don't know how to like take this further. I don't know how to edit this myself or if it's done or whatever. And so I kind of realized that the only way, like, other than, having like great readers like in your life, which is also important, but the only way to kind of do that for yourself, in my experience, is just to like have a lot of distance and to let time do the work. So yeah, I think that's something that I kind of had to learn, but which I think has been really valuable, is like learning to like just let things sit and then come back to them later. And I feel like I'm much more able to be like incisive when I'm a little more removed.
Yeah, I have files of bad drafts. Many things that I can, eventually at some point go back to, which is helpful. Yeah. I had a question, but I can't, it like came in and out. So I was very focused on listening. How does reading other work or reading craft books factor in or not to your writing life?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I feel like reading is the most important thing to do, and I always kind of feel like when I'm feeling like kind of stuck, or that I am not like feeling motivated to write or things like that. It's not always, but often because I'm not like reading enough. And that's something that I forget a lot. And so I think like trying to maintain a healthy reading practice is for me really important to like staying engaged as a writer. Yeah, I mean, as far as like craft books go, I haven't read any new ones in a while, but I do feel like when I do read a good one, it like really like kind of opens up like a lot for me. I think the last like new to me one that I read was probably like maybe about a year ago. I read Louise Glick's like book of essays. I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's
Was it the American, or was it Proofs and Theories?
Oh, Proofs and Theories. Yeah.
Proofs and Theories.
Yeah.
I have that book, but I haven't read it because I read her other book.
Mm-hmm.
It was like it was called like American Poetry or something that was pretty generic title. But yeah. I have Proofs and Theories, and that book is older.
Yeah.
And I haven't gotten to it yet, but I definitely have it. But if you think it's good, then I'll move it more towards the top of my pile.
Yeah, I really liked it. Now I'm struggling to remember the name of the essay, but there was one essay in particular that like really kind of opened some things up for me in terms of actually something we were talking about before, which is like just about like truth. I wish I like had the book right next to me, but it's I think she like has this essay where she kind of makes the distinction between like truth and sincerity, and like fact, or I think it's like maybe those three or something like that. And that was actually really useful for me in terms of thinking through some of the ideas that we were talking about earlier, just in terms of like, how do you tell, like telling the truth isn't necessarily the same as like reporting what happened. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like I'm making it sound not as like eloquent as it is, but that's one I would really recommend.
No, I think I'm kind of getting the gist, and that might also help free up that strict autobiographical reporting that you tend to like stiff arm, and in a good way, I think, in a really good way, and or resist, and I always feel like your poems create like a mood, or like an atmosphere for emotional containing, that works on associative logic more than on narrative, traditional narrative. So Sandra says that, which I thank you. We all agree. Sandra says that we all develop files of work that we don't use, but such work leads us into the next room, so to speak, where we can write a meaningful poem.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
My last question, which is a selfish question for me personally, because I have you here, Hanae.
Totally fair.
I'm a Capricorn, which means I'm very ambitious. And so how have you resisted the way that I'm not, like the desire for publishing?
That's a good question. Do you mean like publishing on the poem level or like the book level or just in general?
I think, well, for me right now, I'm working towards the book, and I send out individual pieces here and there. But yeah, I definitely I want to have a book, but also, I was a finalist my manuscript was a finalist for a poetry contest. Then I was actually grateful I was a finalist and that I didn't win. Because I also was it was an indicator for me that I actually wasn't ready. Because I need to really stand behind the manuscript that comes out, right? And it was a barometer test for me to be oh, you're not ready, because I think I was trying to rush it, and yeah, and I know time is irrelevant, but
yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, that's something I think about a lot, and I wouldn't say that I necessarily resist publishing or ambition. I mean, I'm not a Capricorn sun, but I have a lot of Capricorn as well elsewhere in my chart. So
okay.
I can relate. Yeah, I don't know. I think I wouldn't really say that I've resisted publishing. I mean, I've sent my book out lots of places. And similarly, it was a finalist once, and see what happens with future things. So I think for me the question is perpetually not should I send it, but where should I send it, and how much do I want to be published versus how much do I want to be published at a place I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
And that I feel a kinship to, whether that's, the aesthetic of the press or other poets that are on it or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm always kind of wondering how wide am I going to cast my net?
Right.
But I do think
that's a real consideration for poets.
Yeah. And so I think it comes down to kind of the same core question that you brought up of of how much to invest in publishing. And I think for me, I don't know. I mean, I think standing behind the work and wanting it to kind of be in good hands is important. But I think, at a certain point, probably you also just want to move on with your life. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a process I'm really actively in. So I guess I'll tell you when I find out.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for thanks for being willing to entertain my questions, because I feel like I admire your work so much, and really respect you as a poet, and I love the work that you're putting out into the world, and I am really looking forward to someone picking up your book and putting it out into the world for both of your projects, and I feel this this imagined kinship of being kind of in quote unquote in the same boat, and I think it's really nice to be able to have these conversations publicly too, in little Zoom boxes, because I feel like, it's not magic. It's kind of, and also there's no formula from blank page to book in hand. It's a real privilege to talk to you today. So
Well, thank you. Yeah, likewise.
yeah, this is like my favorite thing, and I'm so happy to have you virtually visit us. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Hanae. Have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you.